But just to say welcome to everybody who is joining us for this evening. We're so grateful that you've spent an hour and a half on a Thursday evening together thinking about how as the church we can respond to homelessness and the housing crisis in our midst. And we've got some amazing speakers. It's going to be a really fast-paced evening. So you have to bear with us if we don't necessarily go into the detail that you'd like, but we hope that today will be a real taster of lots of things that we can be thinking about, and as we journey on this this challenge together around housing and homelessness. And my name is Alison. I work for Compassionate Communities, and we are part of the Diocese of London, the Church of England Diocese of London, and we exist to try and serve and equip churches to serve communities where they reach out compassionately. Everything including homelessness and housing, which we know the church has a huge heritage and history of doing. So we know there are people from all over the country and from all over our friends and brothers and sisters in different denominations. You're also equally welcome. Delighted to have so many people here. So I hope tonight's really helpful. I'm also delighted that hosting these housing summits, and we have 2 more coming up in the rest of the year. Hosting this is Bishop Graham Tomlin, who's Bishop of Kensington, and also massively involved as co-chair of the Archbishop's Housing Commission, which he'll talk about shortly. So Bishop Graham, can I hand over to you to welcome everyone and pray for us as we begin?
Delighted to do so. Thank you, Alison. Welcome everybody. It's very good to see everyone here tonight. And yeah, it's going to be a really fast and fantastic evening. So we'll begin to pray together as we begin. So wherever you're sitting, shall we pray? God, our Father, we thank you for the homes that we have. Thank you for all that they mean to us. And we thank you for the promise that you will one day make your home with us. We pray tonight for those who are homeless, those who are living in unsafe or overcrowded or unsuitable accommodation. And we pray tonight you will inspire us, that we might bear witness to your love. But through what we do tonight, we might be involved in enabling people across this city, even this country, to have homes that echo something of the home to which you invite us one day. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So if I can just repeat Alison's thing, just to keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking, that'd be great. And just a reminder that we are recording this session. If you don't want to be seen on it, turn your screen, turn your own screen off, but just a reminder, if you do contribute in a spoken way, that actually will be part of the recording as well. So just so you know that's there. I guess the background to this is that very recently you'll know that the Archbishop's Commission on Housing, Church and Community reported in February. Now, as many of you know, I was the vice chair of the commission, which met for about 2 years, and we reported at the end of February. And since then, I've been engaging a wide range of people across the housing sector, across the church, and in government. Just this last week, we've had 2 really, really good meetings with the Department of, the Ministry of Communities, Housing, Local Government, and engaging government with some of these themes as well. And so what I wanted to begin with was to kind of lay out, and if you may have come across this already, but the kind of underlying theology of housing that we worked on during the work of this commission, just as a background for everything we're doing tonight. One of the things we recognized during the early days of this commission was that when you talk to people in the housing sector, and especially when you talk to government even, and you ask them what is good housing, you don't get much of an answer. Now, we all know what the NHS is for. The NHS is there to provide really good quality healthcare, free at the point of need for anybody who wants it. But we don't always have a very clear idea of what good housing looks like. And it's been very interesting in our conversations with civil servants and others that so many have responded really positively to this vision of housing that has been funded by Christian faith. So if we can share the screen, Alison, if you are able to do that at the moment, we can run through just very quickly what this actually looks like. So to begin with, the Christian perspective on housing, that first slide, if we can go there, you can see the Archbishop's report. If we can, we go back to the last slide, there you are. It's called Coming Home, Tackling the Housing Crisis Together. And if you haven't seen it yet, you might want to download it. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment, but it's something which you can download from the Archbishop of Canterbury's website. But we came up with these 5 key themes as to what a good housing looks like. If you think of the whole story of the Bible, it's a story about home. It's a story about a home provided for us by God, this beautiful planet which he's provided for us as our home. It's then the story of our abuse of that home, our rejection of God's hospitality, and then the long story of redemption that leads through the history of Israel, through to the coming of Christ, the founding of the church, and then to that last vision at the end of the book of Revelation, where we're promised that God will make his home with us. And so if you take that story, there are 5 moments on that story, and each of those moments corresponds to some element of housing that might echo something of that story. And so the doctrine of creation tells us that housing, good housing, needs to be sustainable. It needs to be in harmony with the created order that God has given us. The good housing is sustainable. It doesn't do violence to the world in which we live. The second part of the story is, of course, that moment of the fall, the rebellion of humankind, our rejection of God's hospitality. And it tells us that if we are not careful, if we do not pay attention, our homes, like everything else, will tend to turn bad on us. They will become unsafe and not good places to be. And therefore, good housing needs to be properly safe from fire, safe from floods, safe from unwanted intrusion, a place where we feel safe. Third part of the story is, of course, a long story of redemption, leading up to the incarnation, the place, the time where God puts his roots down into human life in the person of Jesus Christ. God makes his home with us in Nazareth, in Capernaum, in Bethany, in Jerusalem. And this says something about our need for housing to be stable. We need to provide housing that is properly stable, that enables people to put down roots in a community, just as God put down roots in the world in the incarnation. And so good housing enables people to invest in communities for the long term, because they don't feel they're going to be moved on because of the vagaries of the rental market or other aspects of the housing market that sometimes makes our housing unstable. The fourth moment of the story was the birth of the church, this new community where all the divisions of humankind are overcome, a new community in a new society. And to what that tells us is that housing, good housing, is always going to be sociable. It creates community. So we're not just interested in individual housing units, but in creating communities. And making sure that the homes have space for people to kind of welcome their neighbours in, to exercise hospitality, housing developments, have community space for people to mix and mingle. Then the final bit of the story, the vision of the New Jerusalem, the new creation, which is a vision of extraordinary beauty, a place where actually you find delight in all this amazing city that we're given. And it's a picture of good housing that is truly satisfying, where you just like to come back to. It's a good place to live. And so this story of the gospel gives us these 5 values. The good housing is sustainable, it's safe, it's stable, it's sociable, and it's satisfying. And if we're able to provide that kind of housing through our housing policy, through our housing developments, through whatever we do, we will in some ways be able to tell the story of the gospel in bricks and mortar, give people a taste of the home that we are invited to one day with God, our creator. So that's really the framework and the background to the Housing Commission and the kind of thinking we were doing for it. Now, I want to go on. I've got a lot of different things tonight, which are going to give us an insight into the kind of things that local churches can do, because the focus of this evening is what the local church can do to be involved in housing need in their local area. And I'm the first speaker tonight. I'm delighted to hand over to John Pert, who works for the government. He's Government Rough Sleepers advisor, talking about what a compassionate church response to homelessness and housing might look like. So John, over to you.
Many thanks, Bishop Graham. It's great to be here, and I'm just going to share my screen and put up my presentation. Hopefully that's coming through. All okay? Great. So it's great to be here. Great to see so many people I know and churches I know appear on the chat. And I'm, as Graham said, I'm employed by the government. I'm a rough sleeping advisor working on the rough sleeping initiative. And my role is specifically to do with the role of faith groups. So it's a real acknowledgement of how significant the role of the churches in addressing homelessness. It's always been that way. The church has been behind many of the most significant homeless charities. I used to work for Centrepoint, which was started in a church in the London Diocese at St Anne's Church in Soho, and now is obviously a national organisation. And there's lots of examples of those, but there's also been this huge rise of church-based activism in the last 10 to 12 years, especially with the growth of night shelters, such as we've got kind of pictures on the screen to illustrate. So that's the first thing I want to say, really, the significance of the role of the church, and that's a role the government really acknowledge. I was in a meeting today with the Minister of Homelessness, Eddie Hughes. He's a committed Catholic, with Jacob, who's going to speak after me with Housing Justice. And he was really keen to understand this further. So that's my role. I'm also very involved sort of on the ground a bit more. I'm a volunteer myself in my local night shelter in Streatham. And this has been something I've been working on for the last sort of 20 odd years. And I just want to start off with a picture, because it's always good to root these things in individual stories. And this is a cartoon that was sent to us by someone who was rough sleeping. And you can see there in 2019, he talks about himself as battling with addiction and homelessness at rock bottom, struggling with mental health. Perhaps that's the kind of person that a lot of us have experience of working with or knowing or being concerned about. And then there's a picture of him making some progress. You can see without the injecting the drugs, he's got a script there for methadone in his hand. He's working with the drugs agency, the outreach team. He's got a place in the night shelter. He says things are looking up. He's making plans. He's feeling much happier and healthier. And that's been the case with lots of people in this last year, that over, I think the last figures I read was about 39,000 people actually have gone into accommodation during the last year, during the what you may know about the Everyone In initiative. And that initiative has seen, so many people get into accommodation, especially leaving night shelters. It's really accelerated the joint work between churches and the local authorities. And it's been quite an incredible year, really. I'm really pleased that as we speak, rough sleeping is as low as it's ever been in my lifetime, which is something to really celebrate. And it's also testament to a lot of the hard work of churches and charities and people working together. And what I most like about this cartoon is the last picture, how this guy sees himself in the future, clean, going to work, having received help. He's now on his own 2 feet, and there's real dignity and real hope in that picture. So I think that's just a great place to start as a vision, because it shows as well that no one really comes off the streets through the work of one agency. It's always a real joint effort, and working together is so critical. And I think when we think about homelessness, this model might be helpful. I think if you ask a lot of people, what are the ingredients of homelessness, a lot of people might talk about resources, lack of income or unemployment, debt. People, a basic, fundamental, kind of straightforward poverty. But also, there's also so significant is relationship breakdown. And that's certainly been my experience in a lot of the places that I've managed and worked, that as well as a poverty of resources, there's family breakdown, there's abuse, there's domestic problems. There's a vulnerability of people's relationships that have led to them being on the streets. And lastly, perhaps most deeply, a poverty of identity. Not just people's relationships with other people are weak and vulnerable. Their relationship with themselves is struggling. The issues around mental health that the guy in the cartoon wrote about, and addictions. These are all to do with how people see themselves and how they've dealt with the damage or the pain or the trauma of what they've been through. And the reason I show this is because I think it really speaks to what the church can do in response. Because homelessness is a lot more than just houselessness. If it was just a houselessness, that can be solved with resources and giving people a flat. But as I'm sure a lot of us know on this call, homelessness is a lot more complicated than that. And actually giving someone a flat isn't always the whole answer, especially if they haven't got good relationships with others, if they haven't got trust, if they haven't got people they can lean on. And especially if they haven't got a positive identity of themselves. And I think that when we think about the word home and what Bishop Graham said at the start, that fundamentally homes are places of relationships and identity. And often helping someone rebuild those is a lot more complicated than just giving them resources. But it also speaks to the church's really key strengths, I think. And I think that in the mix of all of the different people who care about homelessness, some of the things that churches can do, I think probably better than anyone, is provide really strong relationships, a place of welcome, not a place of transaction, but a place of community, to come in and be valued. And a message which speaks to people's very identity, being affirmed, being valued, being loved. And so, I think this is an important paradigm to think about as we go forward. What could the church's strengths really look like being released to help people rebuild their relationships and their identity? How can that complement what the larger charities or the councils can do in terms of resources? So that's something I really, just want to keep in mind. And lastly, I just want to share a kind of spectrum, because as I said, there's a huge amount of faith-based work going on. And there's various different provisions that a lot of you might be familiar with. On the left here, we've got street-based help, going out, giving out food or resources. There's the kind of indoor versions of that, the soup kitchens. There's the night shelters that so many of you are probably involved in, which have been rotating around different venues, often or sometimes fixed. And all three of these have really been quite strongly and drastically affected by COVID. And they've all either had to change or be suspended or done quite differently. And just over to the sort of beyond the 12 o'clock on this spectrum, you've got advice and support centres and more specialist help. You've got supported housing, which is real growth. We're going to hear later from Ed at Hope into Action, which is a really good example of a faith-based supported housing scheme. And then the whole area of befriending, mentoring, tenancy sustainment, involving people in community, helping them in accommodation. And these three words at the bottom are the government headlines in the strategy about intervention, recovery and prevention. And I use this model quite a lot to sort of illustrate the range of work. And I think especially when people are thinking about the future direction, I think this is quite helpful to think about whether or not there's an opportunity to switch perhaps from this left-hand side further over towards the right, further towards prevention and recovery. Because I think there's a number of advantages to looking at it in that way. I think that on the right-hand side, often it can be more empowering. It can work better alongside other agencies. I think there can often be a longer term impact on the work. And, in some ways we need all of 6 of these areas. But I'd really want to encourage churches coming tonight. You're going to hear examples of things on the right-hand side, advice and advocacy work, supported housing schemes, befriending schemes. And these are all really exciting areas. And I think building on the last slide, they really help build relationships and identity. So I've got to wrap up, but I'm just going to leave you with 5 questions, which I hope as you're listening to the presentations tonight, you can think about what you think of these. So firstly, what is safe? If you've been involved in night shelters, you'll know that you haven't been able to run them communally in the same way because of COVID, and we're still waiting at the moment for some further research from Public Health England about what they're going to be saying about this coming winter, and we're hoping that will come out as soon as possible so we can be clear about what is safe. Secondly, what do guests and clients actually want and need? I think that's a really important thing, the research, the listening to what's really needed. We know that a lot of people have really appreciated the single room shelters that have been available, where people have been able to transition to those. Thirdly, what empowers long-term positive change? I think that's really critical. Sometimes some of the interventions are quite short-term, especially some of the ones on the left-hand side of that diagram. And what's going to help people change in the long term, like that cartoon that we looked at. Fourthly, what works well alongside other services? It's really important we don't have a kind of saviour or sort of complex of thinking that we're the only ones out there. There's a lot of people who care about homelessness. And actually one of the big battles is getting people to work together really, really well. You do talk to your local authority, talk to the commissioned charities. And I'll say a bit more about that at the end. And lastly, what can make you best use of your church's strengths? You've got strengths that a lot of other places just don't have. You know, the reciprocal community, the welcome, the love, the gospel message itself. How can you make the most of those strengths in what you do? So I'm going to end there, and I've just put up my contact details there. I'm always really, really keen to hear from any groups. If you've got struggles in communicating with your local authority, please drop me an email and get in touch. That's exactly what I'm here for. I really commend all the projects that you're going to hear tonight. I'm really excited to see a great lineup. And I just want to say a really, really big thank you on behalf of the government as well for all your interest and your commitment. It's been an incredibly tough year. But also an incredible amount of good has happened, and I'm really grateful to you and grateful to God for all that's been done this year. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Very much really important perspectives there, and things that we would want to say in the Commission as well, moving towards that right-hand side of the dial as well. One of the really great charities that's been working for a long time, Christian charities in the housing world, is Housing Justice. And it's great to have Jacob with us tonight from Housing Justice. And Jacob, welcome. It's great to have you with us. And we're going to hand over to you to talk about night shelters, COVID, and reimagining the future.
Thanks very much, Bishop Graham. So I am also going to try and share my screen, which could definitely go wrong. I suppose, as Bishop Graham says, I'm Jacob Creddox. I'm the Director for England at Housing Justice. And to be honest, we do night shelters is part of what we do, not all of it, but it's been really the kind of privilege of, I think perhaps actually the privilege of my working life to this last year, to work with people on this call and to see the sort of change, which if, I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm not sure I thought I'd see such a dramatic change in rough sleeping in our country as I have done in the midst of so much tragedy and suffering as there has been. Look, I just wanted to talk hopefully very briefly about what's going on with night shelters, and something I think most people on this call are very familiar with. You run them in your churches and in your halls and community buildings. This is, I think, the Salvation Army building in Wrexham, where they ran a night shelter. And as John was saying, obviously, when the pandemic started just over a year ago, quite early on, there was a realisation from public health people that communal airspace, particularly communal sleeping space, where you share the same air, was particularly dangerous. And so I think by the 1st of April, actually, 2020, we had decanted everybody in night shelters into single room or self-contained accommodation. And that was a major operation logistically. Everybody, some of us are still kind of experiencing trauma from it, I think. But the kind of growth of night shelters up until spring last year had been huge. We had 150 odd night shelters at this time last year, and more than 2,000 bed spaces, around 9,000 people using those bed spaces over the course of the winter. And of course, it's part of the reason for that was it's incredibly cost effective to run a night shelter. From it costs on average between 30 and 40 grand prior to COVID, and some of the running costs were as low as 12. So you fast forward to this year, where we decanted all the projects and the people in them into self-contained and safe accommodation. But obviously we had the problem of what we do for this winter. And as I am regularly, I was kind of completely blown away really by the response of night shelter providers, charities, faith groups, people on this call, to really step up in a quite remarkable way to the challenge set really by public health and central government, which basically said we couldn't return to both communal settings and everything would have to be self-contained or single room. So we have had 76 shelter providers provide self-contained or single room accommodation over the last, since the end of the autumn, around 750 bed spaces, so a lot fewer bed spaces, less than 20 of those in communal settings. And that will obviously cost a lot more money because it's a lot more expensive to run a hotel or a B&B or whatever self-contained setting than it is to do your 12 beds on a church floor. So I suppose the conversations I have with night shelter coordinators and trustees and people in clergy is kind of, well, what happens next and what will this year kind of bring? And this is, John has his kind of spectrum slide. I have my timeline slide, which we've kind of changed regularly throughout the last year. And I'm looking forward to never having to use again. But I suppose we think of the kind of year ahead as maybe using like an airplane analogy. You're on a flight, for those of us who can remember being on flights and hope to do so again. And obviously we had that kind of terrible and quite frightening first part of the year in relation to COVID, when obviously deaths were spiking and infection rates were very, very high. And then I suppose so the kind of red line shows the infection rate, the blue line shows what we, and this is Housing Justice's opinion, kind of thinks what we think will happen to rough sleeping, and then kind of some key dates across the middle. And so as the infection rate comes down, and obviously we start to unlock more quickly, we kind of come out of that kind of scary period of turbulence at the beginning of the year into that kind of stabilization where we probably are about now. And then I think to the second half of the year, when we get to that kind of descent and ultimately the landing part. The reason I mention this is that I think it's helpful to kind of anticipate what might happen. For those of you who've seen these slides before, you know that it doesn't always work this way. But there are some kind of key points I just wanted to flag up. First of all is the bit right at the end, really, the landing bit, where kind of there are very few restrictions left, but actually we know that the public health people are telling us to expect a third wave, albeit not perhaps hopefully at the rates we've seen before. But that any level of transmission in the community really does have a significant risk for communal sleeping space and makes it very difficult to run communal night shelters. And also, like, the landing analogy is kind of useful because it's often bumpy and pretty scary sometimes when you land. So at the same time, we think probably rough sleeping will edge up a bit after some of the hotel arrangements used by local authorities and others start to end, as not least because people want to use hotels for different means once again. And also as the restrictions ease, some of the measures the government has put in place, such as the moratorium on bailiff evictions, furlough, etc., will come to an end. They would be, it's I think, logical or reasonable to assume that you would at least see general homelessness rise during that period. So there's also some other stuff that you will hear more about today, Operation Oak and the kind of the movement of asylum seekers from hotels, updates to the operating principles that John mentioned, and also the government saying wider homelessness strategy, which needs to be renewed, and what that will say about night shelters. And we expect, not definite, but I think that, you know, if you look at Scotland and Wales, both of those devolved administrations have announced their aspiration to move away completely from communal sleeping spaces in their homelessness strategies. So it's not a leap to suggest the government might go the same way in England. But I suppose what I really want to get across today is that my anticipation is that this year we will see largely exactly the same environment for winter shelters as we saw the year before, and that is that rotating shelters shouldn't run. Single venue shelters with communal space will be advised not to run, and that really leaves the option of providing night shelters through single rooms or self-contained accommodation, or doing something completely different. And there's a list of those things on the right-hand side of the page. I think many of which you'll hear about today, but hosting, mentoring, befriending, advocacy, often overlooked, but that kind of prevention stuff that John is speaking about, particularly when we're talking about probably people struggling, particularly around employment and paying the rent in the autumn, becomes really quite important too. So I'm sure these slides will be available at the end. So as I say, we don't anticipate things to change dramatically during the course of this year. So we expect that night shelter providers will have to abide largely by the same rules that they did the year just gone. We've worked with John and his colleagues in government and also Homeless Link to provide a similar amount of money to that which was made available this year to try and support you and your communities to provide that space this year. But I think it's also an invitation, perhaps similar to what John was saying, to have a real kind of think about what night shelters are for, and I think asked two big questions really. What's good about night shelters? And for me, I do this fairly regularly, speak to people about this, and I used to just have the kind of bottom four, open to people without option, and then particularly the people who volunteer in those shelters, the culture of kind of encounter, and that kind of embeddedness in community. But it's not just actually often about when you're in the night shelter, it can often be about when you've left and you've started in your flat and somebody knocks on the door and helps you kind of settle into your new place. Someone also reminded me that part of the reason we use night shelters and have done over the last few years in this country is because they're cheap, and sticking 12 beds on the church floor is cheap, and we shouldn't forget about that, I think. But it's an invitation for all churches really to think about what is good, but also what we can do better. And I think particularly when it comes to this part, we've spent quite a lot of time at Housing Justice thinking about what we can do better. And I think that particularly where we have probably not been good enough, and as Housing Justice first and foremost, but perhaps other organisations as well, putting people who use night shelters and have used them in control of what comes next is not something that we've done enough of. I don't say that because it's kind of fashionable or I read it in a homeless sector blog, but actually because it goes to the root of who we are as Christians, and to our mission as church really. But I'm reading the Pope's book on the kind of building a better world after the pandemic. He talks about the job of the church is to remind people of their own dignity. And I think that to ask this question, kind of what we can do better and how we put people who use shelters in control of what we do with shelters next is deeply challenging. But it's also about giving people some of that dignity back. We're really good at doing it in practical senses sometimes in night shelters, but we're having lots of conversations at the moment with people with lived experience, and the challenge back is difficult at times. Not always popular things, night shelters, but I think once we start to kind of cede some of that power and give some of that control to people with lived experience, that's when we start to really get into some of the really kind of interesting and mission central stuff about how we can create something a lot better, both as a society and hopefully as church. I have no idea how I've done for time, but I think I'm within time. So I'm going to sum up there, and happy to answer any questions and happy to speak offline with people too. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Jacob, for that really helpful summary of where we are right now. So I guess what we've had so far is just the opportunity to take a kind of broad picture view of both the sort of theology behind our Christian understanding of housing, a look at the government perspective, but also what the churches can do in the provision of support for homeless people, but also that really good summary of where we are right now in this particular year. And what we're going to do for the rest of the evening is we've got the whole point of this evening really is to enable local churches to begin to imagine and ask the question, well, what can we do? One of the visions we had in the Housing Commission was, what if every single church across this country? So what can we do in the world of housing provision? And we worked out about 90% of churches across the UK are involved in some kind of means of addressing housing, food poverty, whether food banks or giving out meals or whatever. Only about 20% are involved in addressing housing issues. Now, what if we could expand that number? If every church in the country thought, what can we do about housing in our local area? Because housing affects every single one of us. And so we've got 4 examples of ways in which churches have been involved in addressing housing need in their local area. We've got 4 fantastic organizations linking up with particular churches as an example of that. And the first one we're looking at is the whole idea of befriending. And it's great to have Rose, who is with us tonight from Home for Good at the Passage with the church experience of St. James Piccadilly, and Claire is here as well. So Rose and Claire, I hand over to you for your presentation on this theme of befriending and how that can be part of the church's response to housing need in our local communities.
Oh, thank you, Bishop Graham, and hello everyone, good to see you. So I work at Rose, and I work at the Passage, which is a Christian homelessness charity based in Westminster. So I'm just going to share my screen. So we have a range of services at the Passage, and I work on a project called Home for Good. Bear with me. Okay, so those are a couple of our what's called partnerships, befriending partnerships. So yeah, Home for Good has been going for about 7 years, and as an organisation, we very much realise that homelessness, as people have said already, it's not just about an absence of a home, you know, 4 walls and a roof. It can be really complex. People could have, you know, had really traumatic childhoods, lives, and just never really experienced what it's like to be settled, and that can be one of the factors in the kind of cycle of homelessness, sort of repeat homelessness, and so on. And so often people need more than just accommodation in order to actually, you know, start to integrate into their local area and flourish and sort of build a life rather than just surviving. One of our clients, as we call them, I'll try not to say that word too much, but one of the people who used the Passage once said, "Don't leave me when I need you most." So that just kind of exemplified how a lot of people feel, and that it can be very daunting moving into accommodation when you've experienced homelessness, especially rough sleeping. A lot of us will have maybe moved to London or an area that we didn't know at all, and that's pretty difficult when you don't know anyone and you're settling into an unfamiliar area, even if you've had a relatively stable life. But for people with complex issues, and that could include mental health, experience of substance misuse as a response to the things that have happened in people's lives. Yeah, as I said, sort of moving into accommodation and all the challenges that come with that, you know, dealing with bills, dealing with neighbours, and so on. People can need some help with that. So we realise that because we very much want to have a holistic approach to how we work with people, rather than just a kind of box ticking approach, we Home for Good began as a way of providing that support for people as they were settling into a new area. So, and also to help people to move beyond the kind of homeless identity that can sometimes happen when people have been using services for a long time. And sometimes people can find accommodation and then something happens and they're evicted, or and so they go through that whole cycle again, and sometimes repeatedly. And we want people to move beyond that cycle and build a life and purpose, you know, to find meaningful activity and purpose. So Home for Good is very much part of that. So there's 2 parts to Home for Good. We have a Sunday social club, which hasn't met for over a year, but we aim to start that again in May from the Passage. So that was in sort of happier times. That was a Christmas lunch on the right, and they have kind of trips and activities as well. So that's a community of resettled people who were meeting every Sunday for lunch and kind of Sunday papers, games, and so on. And you know, that kind of community built up over time and was really strong. And so that's part of Home for Good, is the kind of social club aspect. And I am very much focused on the befriending scheme, the community project. So it's a London-wide project for people who, as I say, who have experienced homelessness at some point, who are now in accommodation. There's a lot of isolation among our client group, the people we support. So we basically recruit, train and support community volunteers to be matched with somebody in their local area for up to a year. So that's a regular, it's a befriending project whereby people meet, say, for about an hour a week or a couple of hours a fortnight to explore the local area, find out what's going on. So it's very much around looking at what the person wants to get out of that partnership. So it could be kind of doing some kind of exercise together, like the partnership in the top picture. They started running together, and that really helped the person. Other people have started cycling and so on. But just looking at the person's interests and goals, and you know, does somebody want to start volunteering? Do they want to join a choir, or you know, an art class, or you know, improve their IT skills and so on? And it can also be about the kind of practical help they may need in relation to bills or budgeting, or whatever they might be dealing with. And we have links with people's, people often have a support worker, what's called a tenancy support team. So we try and keep that, you know, that relationship. So we introduce the volunteer to the tenancy support worker quite often by email, just so we, you know, we have that ongoing communication with them, because they are supporting the person in a different way. Yeah, so we recruit volunteers from a wide range of backgrounds, and we'd say it's got elements of coaching and mentoring at times, and you know, we have thorough induction training, and volunteers need to have DBS checks and so on, because obviously they're meeting people one-to-one, albeit in their local area, so you wouldn't visit each other's homes and so on. But we've got many examples of how really meaningful, kind of obviously very structured and boundaried relationships. You know, we have a kind of partnership agreement, which includes things like not giving each other presents and so on. So it's very much within a structure which sort of brings safety to both parties, really. And the relationship lasts a year maximum. And then the aim is that in that time, the person will find those kind of local links and become more resilient. And the partnership will equip them for life beyond Home for Good.
Wonderful. Rose, I think we talked about possibly hearing a little bit from a church that's been involved in this. Is it possible?
Of course, yeah. Sorry,
yeah.
I was just
no.
Maybe I'm taking too long. I'm coming to that.
It's really lovely to hear about the programme, but yeah. I think it'd just be really lovely to hear from Claire at St James's Piccadilly, because I know, Claire, you've been thinking, or I don't know, do you want to explain a little bit about your experience of this, because it's been a really positive. Yeah. As a church,
so basically, we feel so this is a model that churches can take on. And we are doing a pilot project with St James's Piccadilly, which is a wonderful church who have a real heart for homelessness, and we're doing quite a bit already. So Claire and Julia are leading on that, and we're still in quite early stages at the moment. But the idea is that we can provide training and resources for churches to start their own Home for Good project. So it'd be sort of devolved from the passage, if that makes sense. So this is the first time we've done this, and perhaps Claire, if you want to share more about your experience so far.
We've been part at St James's of the Westminster Winter Shelter Circuit for about 10 years, and as Rose says, there's a real heart and commitment to the problem of homelessness and finding resolution. And of course we weren't running this year, so the opportunity to be part of Home for Good came at just the right moment. We've Rose has run 2 training sessions for us for about 20 volunteers. They've been really, really well received. They were really participative. 12 of the volunteers have submitted full applications. There's another 3 people who are thinking about it because they're thinking about the commitment they can offer, and 3 people decided that it wasn't for them. But I think that's you get a really good sense of how meaningful the training was from that. I met my client for the first time last week, and I thought it was going to be a really good project, but it just felt like a really good meeting. We clicked, and the meeting just felt really meaningful. That we talked about things that she wants to address. She's somebody who hasn't left the house an awful lot for the past year, and so she really wants help in getting out and about a little bit. She's talking about volunteering, and she's thinking about what she wants to do next. So I left the meeting feeling really enthusiastic and thinking that this was a really good step, even though, as Rose says, we're still early on the journey, that it will be a really good thing for the church to be involved in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. That's really wonderful to hear. And I wish we could have longer, the whole evening talking about befriending and the importance of it. But thank you, Rose, for the taster, and Claire as well. Claire and Rose, you're happy if churches want to get involved, that they could get in touch with you and have a conversation?
Yeah, there's a leaflet about it which I'm sending to you, Alison. So yeah.
Lovely, and I will circulate that after the session. All this stuff will be circulated afterwards. Wonderful. And Claire, if churches want to talk to you about your experience, that would be okay as well, would it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's really wonderful.
Great. Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you for Rose and Claire for your input as well, and to give us a little picture of what is going on in that work of befriending. We're going on to our next example of ways in which churches can get involved. One of the really inspiring people that I met during the course of the Archbishop's Commission is our next speaker, Adiola. Adiola, it's great to have you with us tonight. And Adiola is from Hope for All, which does fantastic work in this area. So Adiola, should we hand it over to you to present something of what you do with Hope for All?
Thank you very much, Reverend Graham. Thank you. It is an honor to be here representing Hope for All Housing Surgery. Can everyone hear me? Yes, thank you. Hope for All is a part of Hands Up Foundation, and the organization has been running for over 5 years. My name is Adiola Ogmadi, as Reverend Graham said. In these uncertain times, we like to call ourselves the housing experts, who is passionate about empowering people, giving hope, giving people voices, and teaching on how to effect changes. Apologies, I didn't prepare any slides, but I'm just going to speak to you from our hearts. And we're here today when we're discussing how we can respond to the coming home reports and tackle the housing crisis together. I would like to say this housing summit is one way of responding. And thank you, Reverend Graham, for putting this together. This is about sharing information, and it's a way of responding as well. And it is also encouraging to see more churches getting involved since the launch of the coming home reports by the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Commission on Housing, he highlighted 5 core values of what good housing should look like. Homes should be sustainable, safe, stable, sociable, satisfying according to the report, which I strongly agree with. But one thing I found out is that people and systems count on our silence to keep us exactly where we were, but we cannot remain where we used to be. We all have to come together now more than ever to play our parts in solving the housing crisis in our nation. We have to engage more with our community and continue to spread the love of God everywhere we go. We have heard a lot about how our night shelters have helped the homeless people previously, pre-pandemic. But the pandemic has taught us to be more proactive going forward. So I asked myself, where do we go from here? I have personally volunteered at night shelters in the southeast of London, where we created bed spaces and gave warm food to vulnerable people. It was great, but how do we move beyond offering a bed for the night to offering homes to live in? And this is where we come in. Hope for All Housing Surgery is here to deliver training to churches and their communities in order to prevent homelessness. It is time for early intervention where prevention strategy is adopted, where churches are more involved holistically in the communities before people actually become homeless. We need to organize housing surgeries, which will make our churches more visible in their communities as responding to the needs of the people. The Archbishop of Canterbury says, in one of the statements, and I quote, "Simply building more houses is not sufficient. What we need are stronger communities in which people can be proud of and where they can feel safe, welcome, and able to put down roots and flourish." We train churches on how to equip and empower their communities. We must start thinking out of the box and embrace the new. And I strongly believe it will be amazing if we can intervene before people actually become homeless. Prior to becoming homeless, people tend to face extreme housing difficulties, such as overcrowding, rent arrears, relationship breakdown, loss of jobs, domestic abuse and violence issues, substance misuse issues, harassment, and illegal eviction, to mention a few. There are many rent-to-rent scams, double agents, rogue landlords. We can stop them. Our for All housing surgery program is made up of 6 sessions, which run over 6 weeks. It currently takes place online, but we can, adapt to your needs. We can visit the churches physically after, the lockdown is released. And as a church leader, you are required to nominate a housing advocate for your church, and they will be trained properly to be able to do the training. We have, topics like the local housing allowance. We speak about universal credit. We talk about homelessness, HRA 2017, which is really causing a bit of controversy at the moment. We speak about property licensing, rent repayment order. We have a full package of training that we offer to churches. So if any church is interested, please get in touch. If you remember, if anyone has read the government response to homelessness and COVID-19's Everyone in Crisis report, it was recommended to send a clear message to all local authorities, making it clear that everyone who is homeless is eligible for assistance, regardless of priority need, local connection, or immigration status. But we still found some people to be homeless, at that time. And again, there are 3 key points that I gained from I read a book by Bishop Tomlin and Stevens, and the book titled "Why the Church Should Care About Housing." That book really blessed me, and I strongly recommend it. And also the Coming Home report as well. The points I took from there were homes were given to create a community in fellowshipping with God and each other. The second one, people flourish and mature well in spaces that they enjoy. And the third one, the healing of a broken world comes through sacrificial love. We must consciously and intentionally spread the love of God to the world through our service, provision, and worship. There is a need for multi-agency partnership. One person does not have all the answers or all the powers. We need to start thinking of how to position ourselves strategically in the right and needful places to create an holistic approach to prevent homelessness. I was thinking about those places such as the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, it's known as MARAC, drugs, alcohol, and substance misuse agencies, they're all over different boroughs. They have the Prolific and Other Priority Offenders Panel, PPO, a partnership to reduce crime and disorders. We need to get on board and go back to the grassroots. As churches, we have moral obligation and spiritual authority, and we need to collaborate more. I also believe that church-run housing schemes would be a great initiative, but that is not to say that local authority and housing associations are not doing well, but we have a mandate, and that mandate is to go out there and spread the word. I might not know everything, but one thing I do know for sure is that we all need to come together to tackle the housing crisis like never before. We need to be more empowered to continue to be the solution, because we are the solution. And Hope for All Housing Surgery is here to train. Application of knowledge is power. We must position ourselves strategically in order to influence our communities positively. Thank you very much for giving me this time to speak. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Adiola. Always an inspiration when I hear you speak. Well done. That's been brilliant.
Thank you, Bishop.
Got some links. We did a bit of blog as part of the commission on Adiola's work, and there's the link to the Hope for All website there as well, and we'll get that information. So we've had two really good examples of how churches can get involved at the kind of the further level of befriending, housing surgery, training in meeting housing need in your local area. We've got two more examples of how churches can get involved in this, and the next one is clergy hosting. And it's great to have Jenna Roberts with us from Housing Justice, and also Father Ben. We've got Father Ben Kerridge, I think, is with us now from Holy Innocents Hornsey. So I'll hand over to Jenna and to Father Ben for this part of the evening.
Thank you, Bishop Graham. So basically, hosting is powered by inspirational individuals who make their spare room available for some of the most vulnerable and marginalised people in our society. And in the Housing Justice Hosting Project, clergy represent a significant number of these inspirational individuals, Father Ben being a very good example. More than a quarter of our current guests are currently being hosted in clergy households. And these clergy placements have been crucial to the Housing Justice Hosting Project, particularly because we've struggled to recruit new hosts from the wider public. We have partnered with Compassionate Communities, then Capital Mass, in the past to run information events aimed specifically at clergy hosting, and offered support to help people to welcome guests into their homes. So we're more than happy to do that again in the future. The hosting project, it was set up in 2015 as a grassroots response to the European refugee crisis. And 6 years on, and more than 50,000 nights worth of hosting, the project is still needed more than ever. I mean, the pandemic and government's Everyone In scheme demonstrated what the importance of having a safe place to stay, regardless of your immigration status. And whilst it's shown what can be achieved, it has also shone a really harsh light on the extent of migrant homelessness, particularly in London, and just the extremely limited options and barriers faced by people without recourse to public funds. You know, people who've come here seeking safety and a better life, just forced into destitution for years on end, solely relying on the kindness and goodwill of churches and of charities to help them survive. Because the reality is, having an immigration issue significantly increases your chances of homelessness, and being homeless makes it very difficult to engage with your immigration issue. So the aim of hosting is to provide stable accommodation where someone can engage with their case and have a pathway out of destitution. Our project supports asylum seekers whose initial asylum claim has been refused and they're preparing a fresh claim, and also those who've lived in the UK for a long time and are entitled to other private life applications. We work in partnership with the Cardinal Hume Centre to ensure that every hosted guest receives good quality legal support and wraparound casework, plus a monthly destitution payment, which gives a bit of independence. But I'm just going to share my screen a minute. At the heart of hosting is the spirit of hospitality. You know, as a host, you are simply offering someone in need a place to stay, facilities to wash their clothes, to cook and to eat. It's not a professional support role. It is, welcoming someone into your home is providing respite from destitution, a sense of community, a sense of family, a sense of belonging. And as you can see from what our guests say, you know, learning about British culture as well, being part of something. And so hosting is a real perfect opportunity for helping people to build a more integrated life in the UK. And, you know, clergy accommodation is perfect for hosting. You know, it has space, which is a luxury in London. And also there's the, you know, the community and pastoral support ethos that they embody. So, and I think it's important to mention that another benefit of hosting is that it enables people to be able to engage with essential medical treatment and therapeutic services, which is 100 times more difficult if you're rough sleeping or if you're or sofa surfing. One of our most recent guests in the project has just been able to engage with treatment at Moorfields Eye Hospital. And so Housing Justice does offer a full package of support for our hosts. We got an online induction session, host handbook, which deals with everything from safeguarding, common hosting scenarios, trauma-informed care. We do DBS checks and risk assessments and checks of your homes. You have access to reflective practice sessions. There's social events with other hosts and guests, and regular check-ins from Housing Justice. You know, there's always somebody there to support you if there's an issue. It can take between 4 to 6 weeks from the point of signing up to be a host to when you welcome your first guest. And at the moment, we're offering placements of between 3 to 12 months. And this, you know, it's based on what the availability of the hosts is. We match guests and hosts as best we can. There's a series of meetings. There's a hosting agreement, which is signed by both the host and the guest. And the process is specifically designed so that both host and guest are making an informed decision about their placement. There's never any obligation to sign up for something that you're not comfortable with. And just to say, obviously, the benefits to the guests of hosting is quite self-explanatory, but also there's huge benefit to the hosts. Get to meet people from all over the world, learn about different cultures. You get some insight into the UK asylum immigration system, whether it's a good or a bad thing. And yeah, I mean, each hosting placement is different, but I think everyone agrees that it's a deeply humbling and an enriching experience. And it's basically, it's a real tangible solution to alleviating destitution. And so I guess, you know, you're from Father Ben about his experience.
Thank you, Jenna, that's amazing. Wonderful to hear the sort of practicalities of it. And Father Ben has been hosting before. I wondered if you could come and just share a little bit of your experience of what it's been like for you, and you know, whether it's something that you'd recommend to others. Yeah,
thanks very much. I guess when I moved into my vicarage, I knew I had to do it because I had all this spare room. I live alone otherwise, and it just felt exactly the right thing to do. And the first thing I'd like to say is just how well supported I've felt by Housing Justice all the way through. I've had 3 guests over my time. The first one was housed after 2 weeks, which felt like a fantastic success and rather a surprise to everybody. The second one stayed for 3 years as he made his way through the intricacies of the immigration system, and now I'm on my 3rd guest who's just arrived. It's really important that before either the guest or the host agrees to the arrangement, we have a meeting. It used to be in a cafe, but in these COVID times, that's no longer possible. But that's just really important to kind of know that everybody feels comfortable with it. And then really regular and excellent support is offered on the phone by people from Housing Justice to both the guest and the host. It's been an amazing experience of learning about 3 completely different cultures of the people who've come to live with me, especially the guy who was there for 3 years. I learned all about Eritrean pancakes and the intricacies of making them and which Eritrean restaurants were the best ones to go to and all these kinds of things. And it is just a really humbling and beautiful thing to do. And of course, part of what Christ asked us to do. So I'm really pleased to be involved. I'm afraid I was misadvertised. I'm not a terribly inspirational individual, but Housing Justice runs a fantastic project and is very inspirational. So I'd inspire you all, I'd not inspire you, but I'd encourage you all to get involved. Thanks very much.
Ben, you are definitely inspirational. And thank you so much for all you've offered tonight, and Jenna as well too. So we come on to our last but not least organisation. Again, really inspiring, fantastic organisation, Hope into Action, and some of the work they do in providing homes. And so we've got Ed Walker from Hope into Action, along with Joseph Fernandez from St Hilda's Ashford, from the Kensington area of the Diocese of London. So Ed and Joseph, over to you for what you can share with us.
Great, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? I assume you can. It's tremendous to be here. I know we're all flagging a little bit, so I promise you I'll keep it short. First thing I just want to say is to acknowledge all the incredible work that you guys are already involved in, and just to pause and say well done, because I've been really inspired. Ben, you're really inspiring me. Many others have as well, Adiola as well. And just to say, God is really pleased with all you're doing. I've been really inspired by the Archbishop Housing Commission and everything that's come out of that as well. So there's more to do for sure, but God is also really pleased with everyone here. And very quickly, Hope into Action enables churches to give the homeless a home. And what is a home? A home is all aspects that I suppose the Bishop has outlined, but the home I want to give my children is somewhere where there is love. There's bricks and mortar, of course, but they feel safe, they feel nurtured, there are boundaries. And again, just picking up the themes that many people have said, churches are able, they have social power, they have social capital, they're able to meet the deep relational and identity needs that we have. They have spiritual power, we can pray into the lives of our tenants. We have financial power because we can purchase houses. So I'm just going to quickly share a screen, and I'll go through this dead quick. And then I will hand over to Joseph, who, a bit like Ben, is far more inspirational than I am. So I love this picture because this is a picture in our home. It's of, I hope, a sense of mutuality between a church befriender who's giving someone a safe, secure home. There's a sense of love, there's a sense of mutuality, there's a sense of joy in the room, hopefully a sense of safety and hope as well. A former alcoholic sleeping on the street, now dry in employment, has come to faith. This is where we are now. We started 11 years ago. We're now partnering with 72 churches. We have 90 homes open across the country. We're in 27 towns. This is our model that we use for every single house, and the homeless can vary. This is a picture of a guy who looks like he's coming out of prison, but it could be a female fleeing domestic violence. You understand what homelessness looks like better than I do, and certainly you do better in your community than I do. Using investment capital, or sometimes church capital, we buy a house. The church is in partnership with every single house, turning that house into a home by providing loving, befriending relationships. And to ensure quality, so we're not just well-intentioned Muppets, we have an empowerment worker that makes sure everything we do is brilliant and is technically sound. And yeah, over the years, we've won various awards from left-wing, right-wing think tanks as well. So we would love to partner with your church if you felt that was the case. You would need to provide 5 to 10 people willing to love and befriend the tenants in the houses or the homes. We will train them up in how to do that. And I'll just say 2 things before I hand over to Father Joseph. First of all, if you're thinking this is going to be really difficult to work in London, we now have 2 houses in the pipeline in London, both of which are using existing church assets. And I'd like to quote someone in a book I recently read. He said, the way to solving the housing crisis is through rather than around sacrifice. I quite like that's the 6th S. That was Graham Tomlin. And to quote another guy called Jesus, he said this, he said, how dare you turn my Father's house into a marketplace? What were they selling? They were just selling cattle. Every community in the world ever, apart from the vegans, has had to buy and sell cattle. And, you know, if our assets, if we're only interested in getting market price for them, actually there may be a sacrificial way that is better than that and is honouring of Jesus. And I'd just like to honour Joseph, who's about to share probably one of the projects I'm most excited about. We're about to open in the next couple of months, housing female ex-offenders, a real need in his community, using one of his church assets. and he'll explain where he's at. And I will say, because he won't say this, I know he's worried about the financial impact of this project because he could be losing rent by this project. I've never told him this yet, but I'm sure God's got that covered, and I'm sure it's a sacrifice worth making. So, Joseph, over to you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you. I should, in a way, I feel I should have been the warming up act to you, Ed. I think it should be the other way around. I think you are an incredible, inspirational chap. And if you haven't read Ed's book, A House Built on Love, and you can pay me afterwards, Ed, I think you can actually read it, because it really sums up what's Hope into Action. Actually, Ed really just stands for, and he's absolutely outstanding. And you talk about God's provision. Ed, I really am converted. I really believe in God's provision. How did he start with St. Hilda's and the relationship with Hope into Action? I mean, it really started, we had a house, it used to be a curate's house, and we haven't had a curate in a long time, and we've probably blown any prospects of having a curate now, because the house is being used. But basically the house was actually being commercially let. And when I arrived, I think it was really very much a sense of, in terms of community and missional engagement, and really using the house really intentionally, really just more about just rather than just commercially, actually really use it for something a bit more that fitted better our mission engagement. And along comes aside an amazing connection, which is we've got the prison just down the road, women's prison, very large prison. And in fact, I became a volunteer chaplain in there, and they were very much really trying to actually, and it's a really huge emphasis on reintegrating the women back into the community. It's not just about, as others have said earlier, it's not just about really providing a house, it's really about providing a home, it's really providing a holistic approach really just to it, in terms of really supporting, coming alongside the people living in the house. So that's exactly what, and then someone from the prison actually knew about Hope into Action and said, I think you ought to really to connect with Ed. And so we did. And Ed came along, and we, okay, how can we actually really make this work? And that is exactly what we have been doing. Now, are we stepping out and stepping up in faith? My word, yes. We are a big church building wise, small community wise, huge hearts, and really commitment. But for us, it really has taken a lot to commit to these, in the sense that there was always the risk of potentially loss of income. We really rely on that. But what's actually really done is that it's really galvanized really the community. We are being fairly careful at the moment, because we're just about, hopefully we'll have the first women moving into the house in the next couple of months or so. So being very, very careful in terms of, particularly because the house is in the middle of, well, I mean, it's surrounded by neighbors that really don't know what's going on, and they really don't want to stand out for the wrong reason. So being very, very careful. But what I'm really excited about it is that this is really the focus now for our community engagement. And I think, and if you read Ed's book as well, this is not really about us really doing all these for the women, for the tenants. Is actually about what the women are going to do back to us as well. Because I think you're going to be so blessed as a church community to really be able to engage with the tenants, with the women. Now, just something else to say as well, which I think is important. Ed mentioned there are a group of referenders as well, and actually it's an ecumenical project, because basically we've got about 12 people or so at the moment coming from different churches, Salvation Army, Methodists, free churches, and basically we're really gathering people that have got a really strong heart to reintegrate the women and back into the community. So we're really all coming together now to do these, and everyone is really enthusiastic about it. I managed to rope in my wife as well, actually, but she really wants to be part of that. But it's really just this sense that we really can make a difference, and by pulling our resources together, not just really physical, but spiritual as well, people's resources, I think we can make a huge difference. I think I'll leave it at that.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Father Joseph. I feel like I could hear much more about that project than just a tiny little insight. I can't wait to hear how the women get on. But wonderful that you've had that partnership with Hope into Action. And again, if churches are interested in Hope into Action, please contact Ed, or I'm sure Father Joseph would be happy to chat a bit more about his experience as a church journeying with this together. So yes, we're coming towards the end of the evening, and it's had an awful lot thrown at you. It's been a massively quick sort of TED Talk style event with huge amounts of information, so not expecting everyone to remember all of it, but I hope some of it has made you go, oh, I'm going to think a bit more about that, or find out more about that. And just in terms of follow-up, we have 2 more of these housing summits coming up, one in September and one in November. The September one is looking much more at how we can push for action and change in housing and homelessness policy, and in what happens in the world, how we can use our prophetic voice. So we'll be looking at churches that have done just that, and those who are involved in that. And the third one, which comes up with some of the conversations I think we've had in the chat, will look specifically at how we can use our land and what we can do around the tackling the affordable housing issue. But yeah, so they're the 2 next ones coming up, and again they'll be linked in the chat, and you can book for those now. Even though they're in September and November, you can get them in your diaries now. And the final thing from me before I hand back over to Bishop Graham is we would love to pray about this. We can't all do everything. Some of us can do very little, but we can all pray. And we believe that nothing will change without prayer. So we're going to set up a prayer network of people who are committing to pray for homelessness and for those who are struggling with housing in London. And if you'd like to join that, there'll be a link in the email. It'll be a little informal bi-monthly newsletter with a few things in that we can all pray about around housing. So we'd love to encourage you to think about that, if nothing else, this evening. But I hope this evening there will be something else that you take away and think, actually, that's something I want to pursue. So yeah, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand it back over to Bishop Graham.
Thank you, Alison, very much indeed. We've got about 10 minutes left before the end of the evening. And so if you've got a question, something you'd like to ask, and that may be a general question, it may be to one of the particular speakers for tonight, can you just raise a hand? And either kind of, well, I probably won't be able to see you if you raise an ordinary hand like this, but you might want to raise your yellow hand or your blue hand or brown hand or whatever it is that your hand is on Zoom. But if you can signal in some way that you've got a question you'd love to ask, that would be great.
There's one question to start with, Bishop Graham, in the chat about I think it's from St Augustine's in Witton. Do you want to ask that, whoever asked that question, or do you want me to read it out?
Why don't you read that out, Alison?
So it says, while it's true that homelessness is more than just providing accommodation, isn't it time we looked at how we can use church land for housing developments?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one that points up the fact that we in the Church of England are well, we're kind of potentially part of the solution. We know that the government wants to build more houses. We feel in the Housing Commission we don't just need to build more houses, we need to build more truly affordable houses, and those 2 words belong together. So not just more affordable houses, but more of them. So we need to build houses that are truly affordable, that really are within the range of people who can buy us, which is not just a discount to the market rate, but is related much more to people's income in different areas of the country. And we need more of them. And we can play a part in that. We know as the Church of England, we own around 200,000 acres of land. And that is divided. Half of that roughly is owned by the church commissioners. The other half is owned by a mixture of dioceses and parishes. And we know not all of that can be developed, of course. Much of it is in national parks, or it's already got buildings on it already, or it's churches or vicarage or whatever it is. But we do own a lot of land in the Church of England. Historically, that's something we've inherited from the past. And I think one of the big challenges we face today, and it's a real kind of challenge for the church, is how do we use that inheritance that we've had, not just as a cash cow to pay the bills for the church, but as a way of using that land missionally to address some of the real issue, one of the central issues in our country, which is the housing crisis across our nation. So one of the things we're working with, and the commission, the kind of successor to the commission, is something called the Archbishop's Initiative on Housing, which has a small executive team and an advisory board, of which I'm a member on that advisory board, taking on the work of the commission, talking with government, talking with the church commissioners, encouraging dioceses, encouraging parishes to try and find ways to use land imaginatively. That isn't going to mean every bit of land is going to be used for affordable housing, but where that's possible, let's try and find ways to do that. And we've got an executive team who can help dioceses and parishes do that as well. So it's something that's very much on our agenda. It's not a short-term thing. It's going to take time. We all know housing developments can take a long time to go. There are brilliant examples, and if you download the Housing Commission report, you can see all kinds of examples of churches that have set up community land trusts or almshouses. And the advantage of those two models is that it enables churches to retain an ongoing involvement in housing developments built on church land, because what we don't want to do is just sell off the land to a developer who's going to make a lot of money out of it, even if it's affordable in the first generation, because of course next time it's sold on, that discount gets lost to the first person, sort of pockets that discount. We want to be involved in building community, not just housing. And so there's all kinds of examples you'll find there in the Housing Commission report, and that's something that's very much on the agenda of the church, and wanted to do that.
Brilliant. And as I think we mentioned in the chat, we have 2 more of these events, and the third one will be looking specifically at this and that issue. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that, and we'll have some examples of churches that are journeying with this, and some talking from people who have experienced this, in particularly the Faith in Affordable Housing team at Housing Justice, who've been doing huge amounts of work on that. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Final call for anyone who's got anything they'd like to ask or make a comment on, either if you could raise your hand and put it in the chat. It's a good question from Richard Goff. What is the role of letting through housing associations, which has not been mentioned?
Yeah, can I mean, just to share the voices a little bit? Anyone from one of our speakers like to pick up that question, and just your experience of working with housing associations?
Can I take that, please?
Adiola?
Okay. Most boroughs, most local authorities, you have to be on the waiting list with the local authority, who will then nominate you to the housing association that they work with together. So you cannot just go on to the housing associations in most boroughs. They would have given the amount of properties they want to give to the local authorities, which will be rented through the local authorities. So you have to be on the waiting list, housing register, choice-based letting, whatever they call in your borough. If that's okay, please say okay in the chat so that I'll now answer the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Adiola. But it's worth also saying that there are lots of opportunities for churches working with housing associations. And there's an article on the Inside Housing is the main sort of, journal for the housing sort of sector. And there's an article on that, if you look back on it with the chair of the commission, Charlie Arbuthnot, and the chair of a housing association, thinking about the ways in which churches and housing associations can work together on that. And so that's something that can be done. The other thing to say on that is that one of the things that the Archbishop's initiative on housing, the advisory board and the executive is looking at, is actually setting up a Church of England housing association. That would enable us to be able to have a much more involvement in development of housing going on into the future as well.
Could I just say one more thing, Bishop Graham? It's just to really urge people to be really confident in the church's heritage on this issue, and the respect that they have today. One of the reasons that the Coming Home report has been really well received is because it's not just a think tank telling government what to do, but actually it's the involvement and of resources and engagement. And I think that's mirrored up and down the country. I think in the last few years, there's been quite a sea change in local authorities realizing actually what an incredible job a lot of churches have done. A lot of local authorities have said to me, it's like the saving grace in our area has been the church's responses with the night shelters. And that's a fantastic witness. And I think, if there's a lot of support out there, I'd really urge people to sign up to Housing Justice and be on their lists, and obviously engaging with the diocese and all the different agencies. Homeless Link as well are really, really helpful. So there's a lot of support, and if you've got an idea, it's a great way to approach a local authority, saying, what could we do? Where are the gaps? That's a fantastic start to a conversation, because they're often not used to people talking to them like that. So it's a great witness and a great way forward for projects. So just to say, great to be here and great to see all the enthusiasm and inspiration from everyone.
Thanks, John. We have a final, I think we've got time for a very quick question now from David, who would like to ask a question. Are you happy to unmute and do that, David, or do you want to put it in chat?
Hi. Yeah, it was good to hear the broad range of things that is, that is broad front, I suppose, that is required to, tackle this housing problem. I was just wondering, because of that, listening to such a broad range, it sort of started me thinking that actually, in our society, lots of people are landlords, and I used to rent out a property, and there's people in my family who have properties, and also at the church. I mean, I'm from the parish of East Acton in Acton, and often when I've spoken to different people in the church who often got sort of difficult problems with tenants and all this. So I was thinking, I mean, is there any initiative in the church where there's a kind of way of helping people to be better landlords, if you like? Because many people do have, maybe they don't realize that actually that because of so much talk today about prevention, that if even a small number of people are unable to negotiate and not get those people onto the streets, that's already going to make a big difference.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I would just encourage you to read the Housing Commission report. We've got a little bit on there on what individuals can do. Seeing your role as a landlord as part of your discipleship of Jesus Christ. It is not separate from it. It's part of what you are called to as a Christian. If you own a house, you let it out, that's part of your discipleship. And Adiola, did you want to come in with a quick comment on that before we finish?
Yeah, I was just going to say that part of our training, we teach landlord and tenants their rights and their responsibilities. So if you want your landlord to sign up through a church, that would be great.
Brilliant. So go on to the Hope for All website and we go from there. We've reached the end of our evening. We got to 9 o'clock, and thank you so much for all our speakers tonight. I can't go through all of them. There are lots of names out there, but really grateful to all of you for doing this. Just one last thought before we finish. I'm always struck by in the book of Acts, when the Holy Spirit falls upon the church and the church is born. We always think about, St. Peter preaching the gospel and 3,000 people come to faith in Christ on that day. But one of the very first ways in which the church enacts the gospel is what we read in Acts chapter 4, verse 34, where it says, there was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned land or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. In other words, right at the very beginning, this is not a new thing. The church has been doing this, using land and houses to tell the story of the gospel, to show something of the love of Christ from the very earliest days of the church. And as we've been reminded, we've done it all the way through the years. You think of the almshouse movement, you think of all the kind of homeless charities that we spoke about earlier on. This has been something we've been involved with, one of the great ways of showing the love of Christ. And so our encouragement to you is to look at all the different resources, check out the websites, find what you can do. You won't be able to do everything in your local church, but there might be one thing you can do. And find out what that thing is. If you're here as a layperson, badger your vicar until they kind of get it. Talk to your PCC, make sure you share this amongst others. It's one of the great ways we can share the love of Christ together. So shall we pray together as we come to the end of our evening? Let's bow our heads as we sit and pray. Lord Jesus, you call us to lay everything at your feet. And we want to lay at your feet our homes, our resources, our time, our churches, and pray that we may, as communities and individuals, be catalysts for change in our communities. That in whatever way we respond to what we've heard tonight, we would show something of your great compassion and love. And that we will, as we thought at the beginning, experience ourselves and give others the experience of that taste of the home that you invite us to. So be with us this night. Thank you for all our thoughts and conversation this evening. Continue, we pray, to stir up in us a vision for what you could do through our churches in providing homes, love, relationship, community for people in this city and far beyond. So thank you for this night we spent together, and we pray for your blessing on us as we go from here. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, especially Alison, for all the work you've done in setting up tonight and Compassionate Communities. It's a great venture as part of the London Diocese. Yeah, stay in touch and do sign up for the other 2 evenings. 16th of September, how do we use our voice to activate for change within our society? 4th of November, how do we use our land as a church, whether it's a local church, your land that you've got, diocese, wider Church of England. We'd love to see you back for those evenings as well. Okay.